Good morning and welcome to Veterans Heartbeat on the Pulse of the Veteran, where we discuss issues of health, happiness, opportunity, and well-being of interest to the veteran community, their families, and the community who honors them.
Today's episode is brought to you by River, the Rural Institute for Veterans Education and Research. My name is Jason Zentgraf. My co-host Ed Lasofsky is here with me, and he is the Executive Director of River. We welcome you to a weekly wide-ranging discussion of issues, events, opportunities, and needs in our veteran community. We would also like to thank our sponsor, The Man Shop. It's a fantastic spot for a guy to get a haircut, so if you do need a haircut, swing on by and check them out. The gals there do a great job. And as said before, we're also sponsored by River, who offer many services to veterans, such as a free weekly vestibular disorder testing and educational programs that focus on veterans helping veterans. Today's guest is Colonel Bart P. Billings, Ph.D. in psychology, and he's going to be talking about a few different things, all kind of centering and focusing on how to help veterans who may have what is known as PTSD or other ailments, and how to treat them without pharmaceuticals.
Good morning, Dr. Billings.
Good morning.
As a retired Army psychologist, you've been seeing quite a bit of the trends on suicide and other issues. Last week we had Dr. Gordon, a neuroendocrinologist who I guess you have spoken with in the past.
Yeah, I know him.
He made a bold statement that he does not believe in PTSD as a mental disorder, which
I think he's pretty much correct.
Well, why don't you give us a little background on what led you to that and what your background is?
Okay, well, I have 50 years in the field of mental health. I actually spent 34 years in the military, and I've worked in various positions in the military, psychologist. Actually, I got drafted as a combat engineer and trained and then became an officer. Wound up being a hospital commander, psychologist, special projects officer. And I started, when I was a hospital commander, the longest-running conference on combat stress in the world. It's going into its 25th year next year. I continue to oversee it as a volunteer, and it's the International Combat Stress Conference. And over 25 years, we've had people from all aspects of life coming to the conference, military as well as civilians from all over the world. And basically, after 25 years, you can draw a lot of conclusions of what you've heard from various people, like I said, both military and civilians, both treatment people as well as people who were in treatment, et cetera. The comment that Dr. Gordon made to you last week in terms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and him not recognizing it as a disorder, is pretty much what I believe. What people don't seem to understand. I wrote a book called Invisible Scars. In the first chapter in the book, I talk about post-traumatic stress. I want people to understand that post-traumatic stress is a normal reaction to being in an abnormal environment. The reaction that you get when you're in combat or even through basic and advanced training, such as hypervigilance, nightmares, anxiety, etc. These are common. 99% of the people go to combat experience post-traumatic stress. It's a normal reaction of being in combat. In the other wars that we fought, the world wars that we fought, World War I, it was called shell shock, which is a pretty good description because that was an artillery war, and there was a lot of high-intensity, low-frequency vibration on the battlefield to the point where if you're close enough, you would die from it. But a lot of people died without a mark on their body, but that high-intensity, low-frequency vibration just tore up their internal organs. So they had a pretty good description, shell shock. That's what it was. World War II, they called it battle fatigue. A lot of people that fought World War II, including my father, got shipped from one place to another. And the Atlantic, they hit Sicily, they hit North Africa, they hit Europe, etc. They were, and they got tired, and it was recognized as such, and they were given rest and relaxation. Battle fatigue. Actually, I wrote about a gentleman who was 94 when I interviewed him, who was a bomber pilot, and the Army Air Corps had more casualties than the Navy or Marines in World War II. It's astonishing. And he talked about battle fatigue and losing so many of his friends. And he talked about what they did to help him deal with it, which was actually when he flew all of his missions and his crew, they removed him to North Carolina. He spent 3 months there, kind of getting his physiology and his mentality back to normal, where they could be discharged or actually return to duty. So one of the things that you have to understand is they never called it shell shock disorder. They never labeled them as a psychiatric problem. They label it as a condition of combat, which is a normal condition. Battle fatigue was never called battle fatigue disorder. Now, what's happened and the conflicts we're into now is psychiatry got heavily involved, and they started calling a normal reaction to combat a disorder, and that allowed them to use psychiatric medications to medicate our troops, even on the battlefield. That never happened before. Our troops were not allowed to go into combat if they had what was identified as a mental problem, emotional problem. But now they're sending people, and they have been, into combat with 180 days worth of brain-altering psychiatric medications, which all have black box warnings, which are very dangerous. They don't work, and they kind of dumb people down. A lot of the Marines that I see around where I'm at now here, I'm close to the Marine base, Camp Pendleton, complain all the time about being medicated and kind of losing their ability and their judgment while they're on these medications. Matter of fact, I had a Marine tell me that they were in Afghanistan, and they called up headquarters and said, "We're freezing out here. We can't sleep at night. Could you send us something?" And meaning blankets and jackets, etc. And the next day, the supply truck came in from headquarters, and they opened the back up, but they didn't find blankets and coats. They found boxes of antipsychotic medication, which they were told to take, and that'll help them sleep. So that's the kind of stuff that's been going on. So when somebody comes back with a normal reaction to combat and they can't figure out or aren't given the time to readjust, and their life starts going south on them, that's maybe when you can say, okay, they have a disorder because they can't figure out how to get back to normal, and they should be treated. And they should be treated with integrative treatment, which is an offshoot. Actually, it's the same as what they treated our veterans in World War I with. In World War I, a lot of our vets were wandering the streets with disabilities, physical, emotional, etc. And they passed the National Vocational Rehabilitation Act, the Smith Act, in 1920. So in 1920, people were receiving physical medicine rehabilitation, which is a combination of different techniques that would help them improve their lives. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, orthotic prosthetics, orthopedic therapy treatment, psychosocial vocational programs. These were all part of PM&R, and in 1937, the physician, the medical doctor who was in charge of PM&R since the end of World War I, was recognized as a specialist, and they were called physiatrists. That's physical medicine doctors, physical medicine physicians. And that position has been around a long time. It was born of war, and they're not being utilized today in the Veterans Administration. Matter of fact, the Veterans Administration only has hired nationally hundreds of these physiatrists, but they've hired thousands of psychiatrists who basically most often, and I would not be shy in saying like 95% they're prescribing brain-altering psychiatric medications. And it's very difficult. I've been, like I said, in mental health 50 years. I've never recommended a psychiatric med in my career. Therapy was always effective, and even for the most severe patients who were diagnosed with psychosis in state hospitals where I worked. So, I realized very early in my career when I was doing an internship at a state hospital that it was very, very difficult to sit down and communicate with somebody who was heavily drugged.
We see a lot of that up here with the veterans that we work with. We run a crisis line, and we do a lot of work with the veterans. A lot of the mental health has been turned over to the social workers within the VA system. Turned over to what? Social workers.
Yeah, well, that's not bad. But see, what you have to understand, both in the VA and the military community and the civilian community, the person in charge of mental health is a psychiatrist, and they want social workers, psychologists to prescribe psychiatric meds. They'll say, okay, go ahead and do your therapy, but make sure they're medicated. And that's not effective. I had a social worker that came to my conference, and she was both in Iraq and Afghanistan, and she said when she was in Iraq, the psychiatrist there was prescribing so many psych meds to the troops in Iraq that the pharmacist shut him down, and as a result, he went in to the pharmacy building and took a whole bunch of psychiatric meds, put them in plastic bags, and started passing them out. She finally reported them, and they relieved them. But she said in Afghanistan, the person in charge of mental health services, again, was a psychiatrist, and he told her, look, I don't need social workers. I need people who can prescribe meds. So don't forget, social workers, psychologists, their main boss, basically, who's directing the treatments, in most cases, is a psychiatrist who is heavily dependent on using psychiatric medications. And it's kind of a shame, it's a crime, because in the DOD, the Department of Defense, from 2005 to 2011, increased their purchases of psychiatric meds by 700%. It's appalling.
And from what we learned with Dr. Gordon and our studies of vestibular disorders, a lot of the psychiatric meds don't work. They're not effective.
None of them work. None of them work. None of them work. They've done tests with placebos and antidepressants. No difference except the people taking the sugar pill, the placebo, didn't have the adverse side effects. And in my book, I talk about there's this neurologist here, Fred Bauman in San Diego. He's researched dead in beds. He's identified, and this was about a year or two ago, over 400 of our soldiers who went to sleep on multiple psychiatric drugs and died in their sleep. Their respiratory, they just shut right down. That's a black box warning, on some of these medications.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the first thing that really caused you to kind of notice all these horrors that pretty much everyone has witnessed with all these pharmaceuticals? What was the first point where you said, hey, this is not what we should be doing?
It's amazing. 50 years ago, when I was finishing up my master's degree, even before I got my doctorate, I mentioned before, I had to spend some time in my internship at a psychiatric hospital in upstate New York. And I realized then that there were patients walking around like they were in a daze. And it was very hard to communicate with them. And it was the medications. And if you got patients who weren't heavily medicated, no matter how severe their emotional problems, you were still able to have a reasonable dialogue with them and do therapy with them and demonstrate to them a sense of caring and, involvement with them and that they trust you. And what really reinforced this is later on in the 70s, I met Dr. William Glasser, who's the founder of reality therapy and choice theory psychology. He was a psychiatrist as well as a psychologist, and he was the same way. He never medicated his patients, and he worked at the VA hospital in Los Angeles with the most severe patients, and he taught his residents reality therapy, not using psychiatric meds. He was more successful than all the other psychiatrists who were on the faculty who were prescribing psychiatric meds for their patients. His patients would be discharged, and they wouldn't return, where the other patients be discharged with medications and come back. So, all through the years, and then when I started the Combat Stress Conference right after the First Persian Gulf War, when I was a hospital commander, my whole hospital unit got deployed and came back. There were problems, and we decided to do the conference. In over 24 years, I see the disaster that these psychiatric medications have resulted in with our troops. And again, at that conference over 24 years, you see troops come in, you see their families come in. They talk about the medications. And, you see it in your own private practice, too. I saw it when I worked at the medical school. I've seen it for 50 years. And I've seen people who are very effective who don't use medications, like Glasser. And Peter Bregan is another psychiatrist who wrote a book called Medication Madness. And he talks in that book about how people who have no history of mental problems are given antidepressants for, let's say, a foot pain or back pain, and they become suicidal. Recently, if you want to take a look at this Chris Cornell, the musician who hung himself, take a look at what's going on in Ohio. The state of Ohio is suing pharmaceutical companies for providing inappropriate opiates to their citizens. Look at the Megyn Kelly show that was just on Sunday night. The company Insys has been manufacturing Subsys, which is fentanyl, a opiate in a sense, and the people are dying. It was a big expose, and they're making millions of dollars, this company. Millions, and they're circumventing the insurance companies. I mean, if you get a chance to play that back, that segment on Insys was quite informative and shows you what's going on.
When I've worked with families after a completed suicide, I've seen grocery bags full of pills prescribed to a veteran.
That's right. And there's no telling. See, you could get one psychiatric med, and it'll say what the side effects are, but nobody knows what the side effects are, combinations of these medications. Except, like I said, the neurologist, Fred Bauman, Dr. Bauman, he's identified hundreds that die in their sleep because of the combination of medications they're on.
Out of everything that you've been witnessing, what's the most disturbing trend that you're seeing currently?
Well, the psychiatric medications are disturbing, very disturbing. But now psychiatry is starting to get reimbursed from medical insurance companies, as well as the military TRICARE, for doing shock therapy. They are basically electroconvulsive therapy. They're doing it on children now. So, I mean, that is very shocking, literally and figuratively. That's a terrible situation. The medications are bad. It's a shame, but you stop and think about it, and your next question should probably be, why are they doing this? Well, the reason they're doing it is psychiatry and the pharmaceutical companies generate jointly $1/3 trillion a year just on psychiatric medications. And now they're expanding to electroconvulsive therapy, which is basically just damaging somebody's brain. If you remember the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that's not too far from what's actually going on.
Yeah, I remember in his early career, Geraldo Rivera exposed a lot of this going on. Now, we're coming close to time here, so I want to kind of push on a couple other items here. The VA and a veteran. The veteran gets this bunch of medication. How are they supposed to know or sort out what the hell to do?
Okay, it's education. You know, there's a Greek philosopher, linguist, etc., over 2,000 years ago. He said, medicine cures the ills of the body. Wisdom liberates the soul from suffering. And that's what we have to do with these veterans. We have to provide them the wisdom that they need, the information to be able to make choices, because they do have power over their own body. This is the United States, where you have freedom to choose to put in your body what you want to. We're not subjects of the king or queen. We are free people. And they have every right to say to a psychiatrist at the VA, I do not want psychiatric meds. I want an integrative treatment program, a combination of other things, including nutrition, biofeedback, counseling, canine therapy, equine therapy, etc. They have a right. And now I've been working with some people, working with Senator McCain, putting a bill through. This bill is going to make it through. It's already doing well in Congress, both in the Senate and the House, and it will mandate that a psychiatrist or any physician tell a veteran, okay, you can take these pills, and these are all the side effects, or here's alternative therapies you can take. So what we have to do is we have to get back to what worked since World War I. We don't have to reinvent anything. It was there. Physical medicine rehabilitation, the VA needs to hire more physiatrists who work with everything from brain damage to cord injuries to burns to muscle diseases, etc. We need to get them back where they belong and get psychiatry out. I mean, psychiatry has failed miserably. When you have 22 veteran deaths a day, and it's even more than that because all the states don't report it, the people in charge have failed and they have to be replaced.
Well, that's a problem here, is that there really is no accountability within the VA system. What they do is, if there's a problem, instead of hiring more providers, they hire more administrators.
Yep.
And in Missoula, we're supposed to have 10 physicians at the VA. I think we're down to, 2?
Well, if there's anything you can do with the VA, and it's changing, I have some people that I know well who are now working at the Department of Defense and kind of overseeing what the VA is doing. They are saying, give us another 28 days, another month, until we get all of our staff in place, because a lot of the staff has to still be approved by Congress, and it's really, really dragging. But I was told that once our staff is in place, we're going to be doing what basically your book has advocated. We're going to be doing integrated treatment, hopefully bringing back physiatry to be the captains of the rehab teams, getting every state to be more involved with their Department of Rehabilitations, which, again, was created as a result of the National Vocational Rehab Act in 1920, and they're not doing their share in some of the states and working with our veterans, and they are mandated to work with people with physical and mental disabilities, but there's no cooperative programs that I know of here in California where they have permanent staff at the VAs picking up these clients. Department of Rehabilitation, you have one in Montana. Every state has one. they're funded about 80% by the feds, and they can provide medical, psychological evaluation, psychosocial vocational testing, payment for college, payment for training, tools for work, job placement specialist services to get somebody a job. They provide all of that, and it's free.
Right. I've worked with that department. The problem is they are overwhelmed, and they refer all the veterans back to the VA's Voc Rehab program.
Well, they shouldn't be overwhelmed. In California, about a year ago, I heard that they were out there beating the bushes looking for clients.
So one of the issues that we're trying to address is the veteran suicide in Montana. We are at the top of the food chain. We're number one in the nation. We have a veteran completing suicide every 36 hours. Unofficially, officially, it's one a week. Now,
that's a crime.
We've invited you up, and I know that you're going to be coming up in September, and I would love to see a track where veterans can come in and listen to you and hear what you've got to say when you're up here.
Well, all I can say is if you want veterans to listen to me, do what the Marines are doing. I think I've mentioned this once before to you. Dave Ocean is like the vice commandant of the Marine Corps League. He's in Nebraska, and he has 70,000 Marines that are under him. They started a peer group book club where they review one chapter in my book, Invisible Scars, every other week. And it's spreading. They're ordering hundreds of books, and it's starting to spread. And it's almost like me being there when they're reviewing a chapter. I can't be everywhere. That's why I wrote the book. But it's being very effective. Dave Ocean came to our combat stress conference, which is always the first week in May, and he talked about the success that he's having utilizing this technique. And he came up with the idea, and he has no mental health background. This was his idea. And what I told him at the conference in front of a lot of other professionals, you're doing more and providing services to your Marines than 90% of the people who have training in mental health. That's how good the program is.
The problem that we've got here in Montana is I have veterans that are 5 hours one way to be able to go to a mental health counseling appointment.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've been doing here at the Institute with veterans is we've got a book written by Dr. Cook, who wrote CBT for combat veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And by training these veterans in how to work with CBT, it enables them to go along and work with other veterans.
Well, again, you want to train somebody who is. Let's go back to the mental hospital. Let's say somebody is a great patient and knows how to do behavior modification therapy because he was in that program at the hospital. You do not want to hire that person to be staffed and work with the other patients. What you want to do is have that person become rehabilitated, get over his alcoholism, etc., go into the community, work for ABC Company, work there for a year, maybe every week or every 2 weeks come back for group therapy with the other people, but work with other people who have no mental issues. Learn how to get along with people in general. Learn how to speak the language that people out there speak, not behavior modification terminology. Now, after doing that for a year, come back and we'll train you how to be effective as a psychiatric technician. That's my point. So I don't think, and you got to remember this, one treatment modality is not effective. It's not effective.
Oh, I agree.
It has to be multiple. It has to be integrative treatment. You have to provide, let's say you're doing reality therapy. Reality therapy is great. You're doing reality therapy. But you're also doing biofeedback. But you're also doing nutritional training. But you're also doing job training. That's integrative treatment. That's what works. And see, what happens, there's too many people in mental health who are looking for a silver bullet. And you hear psychiatrists say that, well, there's no silver bullet. Well, that's the only thing I agree with psychiatrists. There's no silver bullet. The Lone Ranger, you're from Montana, you know about the Lone Ranger. The Lone Ranger did not have one silver bullet on his belt. He had a whole bunch of silver bullets. That's integrative treatment.
Well, I definitely appreciate you bringing up nutrition. I know you dive deep into the psychology of eating. And, I mean, just on a smaller scale, when somebody goes to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, well, your blood pressure is a little bit high, what's the next step? It's not, oh, hey, let's look at your nutrition and get you exercising a bit. It's, oh, let's get you on a statin. Let's get you on X, Y, and Z. So even on the minuscule level, it's, hey, it's not this disease prevention healthcare system. It's disease intervention. Let's wait till you get really sick and then try to dive at it, and in the meantime, throw pharmaceuticals at you.
You're absolutely right. I mean, again, think about the Lone Ranger and all the silver bullets he had on his belt. And imagine every one of those silver bullets is a different type of integrative treatment, anywhere from equine therapy to canine therapy to Pilates to yoga. And every person should have an individual wellness program developed for their specific needs. If somebody has high blood pressure, obviously nutrition is going to be part of it. You're going to tie them in with a counselor and deal with their nutrition. You're going to tie them in with an exercise physiologist if they have, weakness in their extremities, etc. That's what physical medicine rehabilitation has been about since 1920. It's integrative. You have to realize, and psychologists and social workers come to me all the time. Oh, what do you think about this kind of therapy? This kind of therapy is going to cure people. No, it's not. It may help them in one area, but you're talking about a complete human being. So if somebody's having nightmares, oh, we're going to cure them of their nightmares and they're going to be fine. They're not going to be fine. They're married. They need a job. They need to know how to relate socially with other people. There's all kind of other things that need to be addressed. So one treatment modality, and that's what in my book, Invisible Scars, I identify 20, 30 different integrated treatments, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we pretty much run out of time, but thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Billings, and we appreciate everything you've done out there for all the people that you've helped and all the veterans and your service and everything. So thank you very much for that and for coming on our radio show.
Sure. Let me tell your listeners one thing. Go to www.bart, B-A-R-T, P like Patrick, last name Billings, B-I-L-L-I-N-G-S, like Billings, Montana, bartpbillings.com. And there's about 7, 8, 9 pages on the website, without even reading the book, that are informative. There's a video, there's an hour-and-a-half radio interview, there's there's the whole HEART program, which is a readiness protocol, readiness for deployment. So it's a pretty good book website.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Billings. Appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on the show. I hope you have a good day.
Okay, good luck now.
Well, thank you very much for listening to Veterans Heartbeat. We'd not be able to bring it to you without all the support of the listeners. And thank you again to the Man Shop for sponsoring the show. If you are in need of a great haircut, swing on by and get a snip. Also, thank you to our main sponsor, River, who has an array of services such as a veterans-focused education, a free vestibular disorder clinic, and many more services. Check them out on Facebook or on the web at riverofchange.org. Lastly, we'd like to show our appreciation to all of our veterans. Thank you for having served our country and keeping us safe.